We have, between now and 3 o'clock, we have 3 presentations that are basically, connected. We'll have the sheriff's report, the community corrections, and then juvenile department report. So each of our presentations, we've asked that it be about 50% of presentation and 50% leave opportunity for time for questions. And we also know that many questions have been sent to you ahead of time. And so we'd appreciate you being able to answer those in your presentation if at all possible. So with that, I will turn it over to Sheriff Roberts.
Well, thank you, Wilda. And are we getting any feedback?
Good, you're good.
No, okay. All right. Well, first of all, good afternoon, the Board of County Commissioners and Budget Committee. And I want to just start by expressing my sincere thanks to our staff that have worked incredibly hard in what I would describe as one of the most challenging budgets during my tenure as sheriff. So they've really worked diligently to balance this budget, making some difficult decisions. Want to thank Nancy Artman, our business manager, Under Sheriff Angie Brandenburg, Chief Deputy Jenna Morrison. Special thanks to all our captains and Jenny Helm and others that really helped us get to this point. So I think just kicking it off, the initial plan for this year's budget was that I wanted folks to know that we weren't scheduled to present. There was a change in that. However, that change we were asked to present had really less than a week to get ready for today's presentation, while at the same time meeting some short timelines that finance had said because they needed their things done. So we've done our best to get prepared for responses. If we don't have the answers to them, I just ask for your patience. We'll research those and get those back to you as soon as possible. So I'd like to really also kick it off by, begin by one point that a comment I hear often, and just want to make sure that I kind of clarify and correct kind of for the record, is that while our budget is $101.2 million, today we're really here to talk about the general fund portion, which is $65 million, which equates to 64.28% of our revenue. As you know, the other funding comes from levy contracts that are in essence pass-throughs. So wanted to make sure that we clarified that. So one of the next things to talk about why it has been extremely challenging for our staff, the administration here, to operate our organization when the funding continues to go up and down every year. We've made it very clear in several other budget presentations that by reaching full staffing levels, we do not have the funds to support personnel as well as other financial obligations. Now, while making that statement, I do want to thank the Budget Committee and the Board of County Commissioners for supporting last year's increase. That brought us at that time to a sustainable level in last year's budget. So I kind of looking at a 60,000 foot level of our budget, I just want to explain. So if we were to just maintain a maintenance level budget, that would be just COLAs, allocated cost, etc., no new staff, this year's general fund contribution would be approximately $68.5 million. However, in February, we were told our general fund contribution for this year would be $67 million. Hearing that number, we made adjustments to operate our office without the total increase we needed to cover cost. And I want to explain the process so everybody understands how much work it is. This entails meeting with our captains, numerous other staff to work out how to make these cuts, making sure that we're doing the very best job to cut the things that need to be cut. So it's not made in a silo. So on April 20th, we were then told to cut our budget to $65 million. Now that's a reduction of $3.4 million from what our maintenance level budget needed to be. I also want to point out that we had 5 business days to make those cuts. So our cuts, again, big picture wise, included $987,000. That was 6 deputies, the closure of the medical beds. Now, as you recall, this was a policy level proposal that was approved by the board last year as continuing funding. We also made a cut in $125,000 in jail overtime, $250,000 in patrol overtime, $250,000, over $250,000 from our fleet. I want to point out on that category, though, that last year we cut $202,000 out of our fleet, which equates to $452,432, being 8 patrol cars. My concern, and I'm pointing out we made that cut, but I do want to highlight the fact that we have 99 total vehicles over 120,000. We have 69 patrol cars over 120,000. We do have and have had replacement plans to continue so that at one particular point in time, we don't have a massive increase to the county budget to catch up. So I just want to highlight that we are continuing to fall behind on vehicle replacements. In exchange, obviously maintenance and those costs go up on the other hand. The next thing is $387,000 in materials and services. So when I look at our total overall big picture cut again, the total general fund cuts, I was just learned this morning, ended up being $6.1 million. From the sheriff's office, our share of those cuts was $2 million. That's about 1/3 of the total cuts to the county's reduction this year. One of the things that a common question I get all the time, and I honestly had it repeatedly, is been asked to cut materials and services and overtime. I want to point out that we reduced our materials and services budget on 2 different occasions during the fiscal year 2019-20. So I think it's important for us, kind of big picture is well, okay, let's talk about the general fund support and materials and services. So the general fund support is $65 million, and the major expenses that we see every year, which are very straightforward, are personnel costs out of the general fund. That comes to $47.3 million. And again, I just want to remind the board and budget committee that the personnel cost of our office is 77% of our budget. So as I kind of move forward in talking about materials and services, one of the things that I want to point out is materials and services, we have really direct pass-throughs that we have no real say and basically are obligated to pay those costs. So I'll start out with our dispatch services, CCOM. So we have over $2 million in CCOM bill we pay every year. The C800 radio, which is $217,000. The cost allocation is $4.1 million. The jail medical is $3.3 million. Workers' compensation is $568,000. Casualty insurance is $1.1 million. And the quality insurance unit, which is required, is $504,000, which comes to a total of $59,000 or $59,351,000. So the remaining balance in general fund that we have is, $5.9 million. And so I wanted to talk about some of those costs in the materials and services category. The Mark 43, which is our CAD system, costs $200,000 annually. Our fleet is $2.2 million. Our IT is $1.5 million. Our fuel loan is $800,000. So as you continue to boil down those material and services costs, that where we have any kind of flexibility, the others include cell phones, which today in technology, we use that for evidence collection, uniforms, equipment, and training. So all of which are really baseline vital services for the organization. So we were asked to cut our overtime budget, and I again want to reiterate, as staffing levels go down, our overtime goes up. And I think it's important to remember that we're an emergency services organization working 24/7. And a simple thing is somebody can make an arrest right prior to shift change, and suddenly we're, paying anywhere from, even 4 to 8 hours overtime to make sure that we get that case prepared and ready for court the next day. Not to mention a lot of the things that have came forward as a result of COVID-19 and the demands that have been placed on us. So overtime is one of the things we constantly work on, but it is also dependent on the number of homicides and other critical cases that require calling folks out at a short notice. I can tell you, with the opening of some of our forest service areas in Mount Hood, as soon as things opened up, we immediately had lots of search and rescues, and immediately placing a big demand on our staff. So clearly, the budget that we're going to talk about today is not sustainable. The problem is really exacerbated by the reduction in general fund contribution for 2021 and the increase in personnel costs. So I want to highlight that I do hear that there's concern over the number of deputies on the road, and we definitely struggle financially to maintain full staffing. I want to make sure that I do point out that we are really at a tipping point, and that is if we face additional cuts, it is directly going to be positions, and that will be deputies. We've been asked to make cuts to our budget without making cuts in services. I can just tell you that that is not possible. Our calls for service have continued to increase in demand, both coming in through our 911 center, also through our CSOs that take calls on the desk. So I want to highlight just a few of the calls for service. So in 2019, we had 81,983 calls. Out of that, we had self-initiated activity on top of that. In 2019, we had 54,573. We booked over 14,000 people into our jail. And based on our jail space, we were forced to release over 1,600 inmates early due to limited space. So we are doing the best job we can with the number of staff and services that we're able to provide. So as I'm sure as the county and as the sheriff's office, if tax collections are lower for the county, we also anticipate that there could be a reduction in funding in our levy or ELED, which is clearly a concern to us. So I think at this point, we'd like to start and begin to go through the budget and in more detail. And I'm going to ask Nancy Artman, our business manager, to go ahead and kick it off on our first slide. Nancy?
Pardon me. Thank you, Sheriff. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, just a moment, a little technical difficulty in trying to advance the slide. There we go. So I'd like to just give you a quick overview of revenue and expenditures. The sheriff talked to you about some of our funding sources. The main source of revenue is general fund support. We also have contracts. Those include the city contracts and all other obligations that we have for police services with other organizations. On the expenditure side, as the sheriff mentioned, the bulk of our expense is personal services. And the personal services category is increasing at a rate that is not sustainable. This is not new information to you, I'm sure. You've heard us present this for several fiscal years. But as the sheriff said, we're really at a tipping point at this point. We have trimmed the budget to the point that we can, and additional reductions in the budget will result in us having to reduce in the personal services. Materials and services is down to 16.06%. And we also have cost allocations at about 4%. So this slide provides a general summary of revenue and expense for the Sheriff's Office and shows you categorically what those are. As you can see, our beginning fund balance is anticipated to be down a little bit more than $50,000 for the upcoming year. Revenues will increase at a rate of 1.9%. I would like to point out to you that this is a roll-up of both the levy and operations. So where you see the taxes, those are the taxes collected by the levy. We have an interfund payment that we make directly to the juvenile department through the jail for housing for juvenile youth. And you'll see that there in the interfund. There are some other things like debt service that are included there. And at the bottom in purple is our general fund support year to year. We are not adding any additional positions, and that will stay stagnant this year. As of the time that this document was put together, we were anticipating 14 vacant positions at year end. I believe that we are at fewer than that at this point in time. This was put together for you just to illustrate for the three categories that we definitely get a lot of questions about. What are our personnel costs? What are our cost allocations? And then what is the contribution to the Sheriff's Office for general fund? As you can see, the personnel costs are ramping up. This is a 3-year period of time. We've basically gone up about $11 million in that period of time. I do want to share with you, though, that of that $78 million number in the purple, so that represents fiscal year 2021 for personnel costs, the general fund funded positions account for a little more than $47 million. The rest of the personnel is levy and all of our other obligations, contracts, and then others supported by operations. The sheriff addressed this information in his opening remarks, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, just present them on the screen for you to view quickly and then move on. And I will now turn it over to the Chief Deputy, who will talk to you a bit about our Performance Clackamas strategic results.
So the Sheriff's Office fully participated in the MFR process, and we successfully presented our plan to the County Administrator this year. We are actively gathering our data and are gathering our first quarter data. And next year, we plan to present our budget in the MFR format. It's been quite an undertaking, but we have really looked at the way we do business and made sure that we are aligning our programs and our budget with the overall Clackamas County goals.
All right, I'm back on, and one of the next things we're going to, for the interest of time, going to kind of buzz through these things, but one of the huge things that I want to highlight, which Captain Lee knows we have been working on for a long time, and with our last contract medical provider and now our current medical provider, to accomplish and become medically accredited in our jail. And this is a huge thing. I believe there's only 2 in the state of Oregon prior to us becoming medically accredited. So anyway, huge thanks and appreciation to Lee, his staff, and the medical unit that's at the jail. That was a huge one. Also, as you know, Ryan Brown is the director of our Public Safety Training Center. He's been just doing an amazing job. launched some new ideas about generating revenue. He's been instrumental in the community care initiative, along with Under Sheriff Brandenburg, and really just been doing an amazing job. So one of the next things I would just is obviously our child abuse team has been doing a major outstanding job on that. We've done some merging with our sex crimes unit to try and become more efficient and moving some of that staff up to the Family Justice Center. On our patrol side, again, just highlights what is really an honor to actually see the recruitment and retention of employees. I just have to tell you, the employees that come to the sheriff's office retire here, and that when I see employees come from large organizations such as Washington County and others, because of the different things that we offer, it really is a credit to the people that work here. So our recruiting and retention is doing amazing. Our Marine unit during COVID has been pretty quiet, but during this past year, as you can see, they had over 1,100 voter contacts and are doing a lot on our patrol on our rivers and waterways. Civil Division, as you can see, transported over 9,000 inmates to and from the courthouse. Once again, that is why I've continued to reiterate on the facility design the importance of having the courthouse next to wherever the jail would be, because this is a tremendous cost and impact on our office doing the transports. The other next issue is just really training and wellness, and we have some staff that are now working on this and doing really an incredible job enhancing our wellness program. As many of you know, it takes a toll in this occupation, and we definitely owe it to our employees to make sure that they're well and dealing with trauma that they are oftentimes exposed to on a regular basis. So those are kind of the highlights. The next thing I'm going to turn it back over to, yes, Jenny. I mean,
Jenna. That's
Jenna.
So this is our last slide, and obviously it breaks down the cuts that we had to make and some of the effects that those cuts are going to have. And before we get into too many questions, I do want to make sure that we address the questions that were asked of us of the budget from the budget committee. And I'll start with Lee Eby. Lee, do you want to start with your? Do you want to come over here?
Yeah. Hi, thank you, Captain Lee. And so, really, the questions that were asked specifically, first one was the current percentage of filled beds and our capacity at the jail. Well, due to the pandemic and our changes in our intake and safety protocols,
I'm having trouble hearing.
Yeah, I can't hear him either.
Yeah, I agree. Can't hear.
Do you want to go sit over there?
Sure.
Sorry, it's because I have
Unmute. No? Okay. Sorry about that. So the first question we had was concerning our percentage of filled beds in the facility and what was our current capacity. Due to the pandemic and the changes in our intake requirements and safety protocols specific to ensure that the jail was in compliance with CDC recommendations for COVID-19, we single-celled all of our facility to...
Can we have that slide, the previous slide back? I think we skipped a page. Thank you.
And so currently our current capacity is at 82.23% of the facility right now of our single cells as we are right now during the pandemic. The other question that was asked in addition to that was there were any plan for early releases. Currently, we do not have any plans for early releases. However, if our bed capacity does go down with the closing of the 26 beds, there is the possibility that early releases could occur and forced release protocols would be initiated during the year. The next question was why the medical beds, were they not part of the PLP? And the answer is yes, they were. And why the 26 beds? And it really has one to do with numbers and what was the best for the criminal justice system. It requires 6 deputies to staff the current 26 medical beds in the facility. This is due to the design and just the labor-intensive nature of the facility and the medical beds that we were talking about. If we chose to cut 6 positions anywhere else in the jail, it would result in between 84 and 88 beds. So we chose to take the 26, not the 84 or 88 beds that would occur because of those numbers. With the reduction of, the next question was there a reduction of bed space? Would that increase our forced releases? And while that's hard to predict currently with the current pandemic that's going on and what our intakes would look like in the future, historically we can look at the numbers and we could see between probably an increase of 50 to 57 adults in custodies per month being forced released due to a capacity issue at the jail. The next question had specifically to do with would there be an increase in recidivism? Again, difficult to predict, not knowing the intakes that would be coming into the facility. But if we look at historical data throughout our jail, we could see that we probably see an increase between 1.5 to 2.9% in recidivism. I think that was all the questions.
Yep.
One thing I'd like to just add, and this is to talk about Captain Lee Eby and what's going on in the jail. I would like to highlight that as a result of COVID-19, one of the things that Lee and his staff came up with was really a plan to prevent COVID-19 getting into our jail. It was quite an extensive plan. It was so well done that it was pushed out to the rest of the state, modeled after the work that Lee and his staff came up with. Keep my fingers crossed. We haven't had a case. I can tell you both in the state prison and throughout the United States, COVID-19 is in many of the jails, and really because of our screening process, which is really also modeled after the hospital's standard. Nobody crosses the threshold to come into our jail without temperatures. There's an isolation set up. So a number of things that Lee and his staff went into to, protect both the safety of our employees and the inmates that are in our custody. So just want to once again credit Lee and his staff for coming up with a plan early on. Really made all the difference in the world. So thank you, Lee.
Yeah, the next questions we had were in regards to the fleet. The first question was, how long do we keep patrol sedans? And on average, we like to keep them about 7 years. There's a lot of different factors that go into that, including mileage, usage, repair history, maintenance history, etc. But 7 years is the ideal amount. Is there an established replacement schedule? As the sheriff mentioned earlier, we'd like to try to rotate those vehicles out at about 120,000 miles. Unfortunately, as he mentioned, we're well over that. And the existing fleet, the patrol cars that are assigned to deputies, as well as our spare fleet, it's something that really needs to be addressed moving forward. And then the third question was, how much is a new patrol sedan fully outfitted? $57,844.30. That includes the purchase price of the vehicle, all of the equipment, installation of the equipment, equipment. Some people ask equipment. We're talking about lights, sirens, radios, in-car cameras, etc. So it's a big chunk. It's a big commitment, a big financial commitment for the county.
Thanks. All right.
Jenna, this is Elizabeth.
Yes.
It's, the gentleman that just spoke, does he also have a count of vehicles that are in your budget, your forecasted budget too?
Okay, hold on one second. Mike, what's the count on the total budget? So how many we have currently?
No, in the budget to be
How many do we have
purchased.
budgeted for this year, Mike, to be purchased? Yeah, well,
We're down to 21.
21. So 21 vehicles.
All right. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. So I just want to finish up with the questions. I want to make sure that I have them here. So one of the questions was, what makes up the 1.9 million in increased sheriff's office personnel services? And I believe that question was answered. It's PERS, COLA, step increases, and benefits. And then the second question was, what does it mean that the sheriff's office is in a deficit of 3.9 million? And we clarified that. And so essentially our personnel costs went up 1.9 million, and we were asked to cut 2 million. So in essence, that's what made up the 3.9 million. I'm going to turn it over to Shane Stringfield to answer the final question that we got from board member Feely, which was about traffic. Does Shane have to come here too? Shane, you have to come over here. I'm sorry.
Hello, it's Shane Stringfield, the Patrol Division Commander for the Sheriff's Office. The question was, will traffic deputies just shift to patrol on their existing shift schedules? We have them on the patrol shift schedule, and they're only placed out for traffic specific as 8 David units for us on our CAD system if we have fully staffed districts. So initially with COVID-19 even, we moved them all off of their motors and moved traffic all to districts. But we have over the last few weeks, as we're phasing things back in, put 8 David traffic cars back out specifically, but only when we have staffing to do so. So that is happening now. The other question is, will there be times of the year when they will not be able to reduce overtime expenditure dollar for dollar because there are not enough deputies on vacation, sick leave, or other types of leave? So what we have control over, we manage and only let off what we should be letting off for vacation and other leave banks, but there are things that are out of our control, such as FMLA, workers' comp, military leaves, just to name a few. And those have impacts on our staffing levels, and those create vacancies. And so we don't have control over those. And when we get below minimums, that does create overtime. So that's hard to predict. We just don't know when those are coming at us sometimes, but we do have overtime because of those things that are not in our control.
Ahead of time. I believe there may have been some questions that came in at 12:30. Look those over. So I apologize. I don't have those questions, nor do I probably have the answers. And we could get those answers for you later if that's after I have a chance to look at them.
Chair Parks, we have Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, so, and you guys, the Sheriff's Office folks who finished with all your presentations and and answering the questions. So I see we've got Commissioner Savas, and then Drenda, you've got the list of the others there, Jan and Humberson and on. Okay, great. Let's go.
So Commissioner Savas.
Yes, thank you. Sheriff, I guess, I'm sure you're maybe, or Nancy, I'm not sure who wants to answer the question. How many new hires has your department made in the last 12 months that were non-sworn hires?
So Commissioner, thank you for the question. We received those just shortly prior to our presentation, and we'd be happy to address that and get you a response after the presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have that information compiled at this time.
Okay, so I want to, can you bring your slide back to slide number 3?
Yes, and I was told that number is 8.
8?
To your prior question, yes.
8 non-sworn new hires?
Correct.
8, thank you.
Right, not to clarify, not new positions, just new hires.
New hires, right. That was my question. Thank you.
Slide number 3. Oh, yes, Commissioner, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused, and I think that maybe for people that are watching this today and in the future, just so I can understand in the introduction, and I looked all over for a $6.1 million cut in the general fund. So I just want to say that your slide, this slide that you provided, shows that in fiscal year 17-18, the general fund contribution, if you look at the purple line, support is 58,300,000 or so. In 18-19, that increased to 59,429,000. And in fiscal year 19-20, that increased by 7 million to 65,759,000. And then in the proposed budget you have before you is a $65 million contribution. So essentially it's gone up, had a big jump in fiscal year 19-20, and it's right around the $65 million mark. And in your own numbers here, you show a minus 665,000 of the contribution adjustment. I don't see a $6.1 million cut in the general fund support. And I'm specifically calling out the general fund support as it was stated. So I just want to clarify, I don't see that. And so that's a comment. The other one I want to point out to which we've tried to do or we intend to do, and I know that there's been a lot of different ideas about a courthouse and where a courthouse should go. And I do appreciate, I think we're in alignment with the Board of County Commissioners that we want the courthouse to be as close to the jail as possible to again, try to achieve those savings that you cited, Sheriff, accurately so, that we indeed want to be able to capture with a jail as close, or a courthouse jail close to one another as possible. So locating it in another part of the county perhaps would probably exacerbate it, because certainly up the hill, down the hill, top or red soils versus down at the bottom of Oregon City, that's a little bit of distance, but it's not as severe perhaps as going to center of the county or to I-205 area and Sunnyside, like the town center area, for example. That's also another comment. The 6.1, getting back to the 6.1 that was cited as a decrease, that's approximately 10% of the general fund contribution. And I don't see a 10% cut. So I look for 10% number. So I guess getting back to that, all I saw was a 10% increase. Could someone explain, maybe Sheriff or your staff, explain what $6.1 million cut you're referencing?
Sure. And very good point, Commissioner. And what the Sheriff was trying to do was to anecdotally explain what our budget needs in terms of general fund support in order to be sustainable. So that was the counties. Okay, pardon me. So in speaking to, there's two separate issues going on. So the $6.1 million is what the county administrator stated this morning was the total general fund cut countywide, so not to the sheriff's office. And our $2 million represents about 1/3 of that cut. So you won't find that here in our budget. It's the county-wide general fund cut.
Okay, so essentially then, is it accurate to say that the slide you provided here of the general fund contributions dating back to fiscal year 17-18 is the numbers you provided? There is no 7-figure cut.
There actually is a $2 million cut. It's not showing. So let me point you to where to look, but you won't see it, and I'll explain to you why. So if you were to look in the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget column, if you go down to the general fund support line, it lists a number of $65,759,000 $93,998. The Sheriff's Office initially received a general fund contribution in February of $2 million greater. So when we were told to take cuts, and that was to help balance the budget for this year, we were asked to take a $2 million cut. So that is where the 7 million, or the seven figure, not 7 million, thank goodness, cut comes into play. So rather than that $65 million number depicted there, it would have been $67 million.
Okay, that of a proposed budget.
Correct.
Not a real budget. So right now we're still in, frankly, we still have a proposed budget we're even talking about today. It's not really a cemented budget until it's approved in late June. So what we're really talking about is really what we may want for a budget versus what we may have available to support a budget. Is that correct?
That's accurate, but Commissioner, in building that budget, we had to take some real cuts in order to do so. So that's why you notice the 6 deputies gone and the jail beds closing, overtime cut, fleet reduced. So even though it's a proposed cut and a proposed budget, it's impacted us directly right now in order for us to present to you a balanced budget.
Okay. So for example, you mentioned the 8 positions that were non-sworn that were filled or refilled. They're hires. I imagine they're hires. And I don't know what that totals out to be, but in a time of cuts, in anticipation of that, why would we be filling and maintaining non-sworn or replacing non-sworn positions and then suggesting we cut sworn positions?
So I can talk a little bit about that. I think first of all, some of the positions are also to accomplish our MFR goals that we have staff assigned to do kind of the analysis to kind of help meet that goal of the county. The other thing that some of our non-sworn staff which are key to our organization, which I consider our JSTs or our CSOs. So those are support staff that on the CSO perspective, take phone calls, keeping deputies free to handle more critical 911 calls, and computer forensic analysis staff and some others that over time we have actually tried to shift to employ more non-sworn staff because it is more cost efficient. So let me give you as a forensic examiner, for example, is we used to have deputies doing that. Well, then they have to maintain their firearms certification. They have to go to all the basic training. Whereas if I hire somebody out of a university that's a forensic examiner already trained, they do not need to maintain that status. I save money in the overtime. So that's one of the issues. I did want to come back to the transport. Again, it's been a few years ago, but we hired TRG Consulting to really look at the cost savings in transport. So when you talk about distance, the distance is really irrelevant, whether it's 2 miles or 5 miles. The cost impact to us is lining up inmates in a Sally Port, pulling them out of cells, having to put them in a transport vehicle and drive them down there. So the cost is really minimal about how far you drive. The impact is on us as moving staff or inmates. And that's why in really modern, efficient facilities, they never ever go into a car. They walk down a hallway and right into a court for an arraignment. It's much more secure and safe, and it is way more cost effective. So did you want to cover something, Jenna, that I might be missing on this? Or Nancy is, I guess.
Thank you, Sheriff.
I do appreciate the response. Go ahead, Jenna. I'm sorry.
Oh, hi, Commissioner. It's Nancy. So also, we just wanted to follow up with stating at the time that we filled them, we didn't anticipate the $2 million cut. So we had no way of knowing or having the foresight of that. Had we known, we may have held something open, but we just went with the information we had available to us at that time.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nancy. I just want to one thing that came up last year during budget, and I want to just thank Sheriff Roberts and Chief Deputy Morrison and Under Sheriff Brandenburg. We sat down in your offices a couple times throughout the year, the last 12 months, and try to work through some data. We talked about the budget forecasting, knowing that we would be actually in a crunch. And we talked about that. Also talked about a question that came up last year that myself and budget member Feely had asked about dispatching, and we were trying to get at a number of those calls for service, how many were dispatched. And this came up yesterday a little bit, and I wanted just to highlight that what your response was that I learned that we discussed yesterday was a lot of those calls for service are actually handled by CSOs, which are non-sworn, as I understand it, and not all, but a lot of them. And and those are considered dispatched, I think, by your description in the email communications that we had late last year. So while I understand those 8 positions where, facing a crunch and all, and they were filled, and knowing that from last year and the year before, we were foreseeing, and we still do foresee a headwind financially as far as revenues and expenses. So my question is, were any of those 8 positions filled CSOs?
So so I can tell you what the positions were. So 4 of them were jail services technicians, which are essentially they perform a similar kind of function of support to our jail deputies, and as the CSOs do to our patrol deputies. But I don't believe any of them were CSOs, no.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you've all made a great case over the years how expensive it is to bring on a sworn officer, how the training and everything else involved. And it seems to me, again, it's not my line of work, it's not my expertise, but it seems to me that would be perhaps the last position to cut. But that's just my comment. And Sheriff Roberts, I want to thank you for your years of service and congratulations on your retirement, I gather. And I really appreciate some of the programs that you've initiated. In particular, the one that is closest to me is the Safe Place, the Family Justice Center. And I really appreciate a number of your programs and your work and your passion for your work. So thank you for years of service.
Thank you, Paul.
We have Jan Lee next.
Yes, my question was answered in the last discussion. Thank you. And thank you to the sheriff for your many years of service. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Humberston. Are you on mute, Commissioner? Perhaps he stepped away. Ann Lee?
There we go.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hit the microphone again. I was saying that I got interrupted during the course of some of the question and answer section, so I may have missed this and I apologize, but I wanted to confirm that the position cuts that have occurred as a result of the necessity of balancing this budget were only position cuts and not layoffs of any personnel. Is that correct?
So Commissioner Humberson, that's correct. So as the way of the sheriff's office, we are constantly hiring and people are retiring. And so in the last 6 months, we've had 3 people retire and 1 announced that his retirement and 2 people resign. So that's what makes up those 6 positions. And so so yes, that is correct. That's not any actual bodies, they're just positions.
Okay, thank you very much. That's somewhat of a relief, frankly. You report dispatch, if I understood you correctly, as whether a call is handled over the phone or you send a deputy out. Am I correct on that?
Commissioner Humberson, I'm going to turn this over to our patrol captain.
Thank you.
Yeah, Captain Strangfield back again, Commissioner. So dispatch call.
Lost you. Can't hear you.
You can't hear him?
Is your AirPods on?
No. Hold on a second.
Stand by.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
Mic check. Okay, sorry. So dispatch calls are all calls that are dispatched through CCOM. So those would include 911 calls, non-emergency calls that go to all both CSOs or deputies in the field. So we can break out specifically what goes to our CSO desk calls, but they're all in the category of being dispatched.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. And I was in listening to the discussions earlier, I was thinking most people would define dispatch as sending someone out to a place to respond to a citizen's needs. And that something was handled over the phone in some other manner, other than sending a person out there, would be considered something different than dispatch. So you might break those two out in the future. It would help. Because in my mind,
what goes to the desk for sure. But also, I want to be clear that sometimes people calling in just want phone contact. They're requesting phone contact. We're not making that decision. The victims or the people asking for us are asking for us just to call them. So that's something to be mindful of as well.
It's just, in my mind, it's a misleading when we use the word dispatch, because it says in my mind by definition that you have sent a person there, when not in all cases do you do so. And that doesn't mean that you don't take time, and it doesn't cost money to respond to their concerns. I get that, but that breakout might be a little bit helpful.
Thank you.
Other than that, all my other questions, when I was not interrupted, did get answered. So I appreciate the efforts of the department. And to our Sheriff, Craig Roberts, congratulations on your retirement and best wishes in the future.
We have Ann Lee next.
I only have a question on Sheriff Administration Budget Summary, page 13. And I noticed the other revenues of project year 1920. The amount is negative 76,695. And I'm just curious, why would you have a loss on that line item?
That's a good question. Thank you. And that's something that I have talked with Elizabeth Comfort, and we're addressing that issue. It actually is a posting of negative interest. And that's kind of been a practice with the Treasury, and it's something that we're addressing. So going forward, it should be a non-issue. Elizabeth, do you want to add to that?
I do. Thank you, Nancy. And great question, Anne. And we are looking into when those negative interests appear. And what we have with the Sheriff's Department is, as the general fund dollars are distributed on a quarterly basis, we have payroll. That there's no vacancy of funds. It's just timing of transferring on the books the property tax over to the Sheriff's Department's financials. And so we are working on correcting that process so they won't have that negative interest going in the future. So it looks like an advance from from another fund, and they're charging interest. And so we will eliminate that in the next year.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Good question.
Good question.
Yeah, Mr. Feely.
Thank you. I wanted to chime in a little bit on the sworn versus non-sworn issue. I think it's critically important that any sworn dominated organization have a blend of sworn and non-sworn employees. I was a non-sworn employee in an otherwise sworn organization for 13 years. And a couple of the advantages are you can hire people in their area of expertise. When you have a sworn person doing what would normally be a civilian job, they're coming up through recruitment, in this case, to be a deputy sheriff. That doesn't necessarily mean that they've been educated or have the experience to do another job. Also, the non-sworn employees aren't in a bargaining unit that goes to binding arbitration under Oregon law, and they tend to be cheaper. Some of those reasons were mentioned, but I think it's too easy to say, you know, cut all the non-sworn, leave the sworn. It takes a blend, and it takes a different set of skills to be on the street or doing an investigation compared to doing financial work or whatever it is, forensics, whatever they do. So that's more of a statement. Is Mike Palmer still around? Nancy? Sheriff?
He is, just a moment.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, sir.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So we've worked together before.
We have.
Issues. I'm curious, like, how many of your patrol vehicles are beyond the time you would normally replace them?
The latest report we had was a mileage report that we had received from County Fleet. Currently at this time, we have over 100. The sheriff mentioned 99. That report was provided to us at the end of March.
You have 100 total?
We have 100 total vehicles over our replacement schedule.
Oh my gosh.
Mileage of 120, correct.
Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. And we both know from experience that those vehicles cost more annually to maintain.
Correct.
And they're all going to come due at the same time some year, and the county may or may not have money. So it's correct. It needs to be noted. That's kind of a dangerous thing to do. And it's easy to do in the concept of, you know, needing to cut the budget. And in fact, the prior employer we worked for did that repeatedly.
Correct.
And finally got away from that because it ended up costing a whole lot more money.
Right. And that's our concern, is that at some point, you know, we're not looking at a $3 million fleet budget. We're going to need $6-8 million to get us caught up.
At least. Okay. And then Sheriff Roberts.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Hey there. We talked as a budget committee this morning about needing a sustainable budget for Clackamas County. I don't know if you were able to listen to any of that, and doing that over the period of the financial forecast. You know, we heard from the district attorney this morning that he thought the crime rate was going up. And I'm wondering, from your opinion, if A, you agree with them, but B, do you consider this current budget, like sans any other additional revenue or expenditure cuts due to state funding, do you consider it sustainable?
No, and I think as our next budget presentation, you're going to hear more from community corrections and some of the impact that we're having there. I would say in some areas crime is increasing. What we're really seeing is a demand for services. I can tell you just with COVID, domestic violence is way up.
Right.
We really also anticipate some kind of a spike in a number of areas that when we completely reopen Oregon. So it is, and I think that's where this budget has been so concerning. And I realize there's a lot of challenges and issues facing us. And I did want to point out, you know, before we opened those jail beds, I mean, I had a conversation with the county administrator, and I just said, listen, I don't want to open these beds and turn around and have to close them. I mean,
I think I remember you saying that, actually.
Yeah, and so it's, you know, we wanted to follow the direction of the budget committee, and, you know, that was the direction we were given. So we went ahead and did that. And it is painful for me to unfortunately have to kind of turn around and shut those. I can tell you those beds have been essential with COVID, and they really did make a big difference. But when it comes to looking at our global picture of, you know, how can we balance this budget, unfortunately, that's what our command staff continues to really look at, is how we can do it.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of good choices, for sure. So I'd like to chime in and congratulate you on your years of service for the county. You've done a great job.
Thanks. Thanks, Tom.
I really appreciate the relationship I've had both with you and Jenna and Angela and Nancy. I've always gotten the information I requested, and I appreciate it very much. So I hope you enjoy retirement as much as I have, because I just absolutely love it.
Yeah, well, it looks like you're back still working.
Yeah, well, here and there, but it's all under control. It's by choice. I did have one other comment that may help Commissioner Savas when he's looking for reductions or cuts in the numbers. It's hard to find them in the numbers because the cost of, say, just an individual deputy goes up every year. I mean, benefit costs are going up. The bargaining unit agreement calls for increases. So that same deputy that was in the budget 8 years ago is costing a whole lot more next year, yet you haven't really increased service. So I think when you're talking reductions, you're talking reductions from what you anticipate current service level to cost. And those numbers are hard to find in the budget numbers themselves. All right, I'm done.
Thanks.
Okay, we have 3 more people with questions, and I just want to point out it's just a couple minutes after 2 o'clock, and that was the time to have started our second presentation. So just please be as succinct as possible, and so we can get through the community corrections and juvenile departments by 3 o'clock, when we'll get a few minutes for a break again. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Coldwell?
Thank you. My comments and questions are very much in line with what Tom was just talking about, which is that some of these budget cuts have built-in costs over time. And that's kind of where I was going with all of my questions about recidivism rates and forced releases. And we were talking this morning about recidivism rates increasing. I don't know whether we have any kind of a handle on why that is. I'm concerned that what we're doing is going to be making that problem worse, and that we're going to be approaching the remaining problems at a more expensive level. And this actually ties in with community corrections as well. It's the whole system that I want to make sure that we aren't turning away from best practices and what we know works so that we can make budget cuts today. I would also fold in with that the questions about overtime. You and I have talked before about finding the sweet spot of hiring enough staff that you have floaters to fill in what otherwise might be overtime situations, but not hiring so many that you have people sitting around, you know, not having a spot to fill that day. So I'm hoping that we can go beyond just asking questions and start looking at what amendments we might want to make. So I don't know whether you're prepared to answer these with firm numbers, but I'm very much interested in looking at the costs that this proposed budget is building in that are invisible as of today. Does that make any sense?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And we don't have some of those numbers available today, but I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, as recidivism increases, you know, what is that impact? And as you probably know, I am an absolute firm believer of really 2 key elements in reducing crime and trying to really get ahead of the curve, one of which is addressing child abuse as soon as we can. I believe that if we can impact kids that have been abused and face trauma and have a good plan to really support them and get them headed in the right direction. Second of all is community corrections. CSAP program is drug and alcohol addiction is really a fundamental driver of crime. And what I am so proud of this organization is that that they see the importance of drug treatment. We've seen the impact of having people clean and sober out there and not committing crimes in our community. Unfortunately, and we'll talk about that in the community corrections budget, we're getting hit there really hard as well. And can talk, yeah. So this is kind of, we feel like we're kind of getting hit from a number of areas, and it is obviously my top priority to provide the best level of public safety service we can with the funds that are given to us. So, you know, big picture is it truly is having a jail that it can handle our population. It's, as you know, I mean, the jail is pretty antiquated, and we do the best we can with it. So we'd be happy to try and pull together some numbers and have a further conversation about that, which I do think is important.
Well,
and if I may, Sheriff, so just to follow up, closing those medical beds, were specifically to work with people with mental illness. And, you know, closing those is just going to exacerbate the problem that we have with people with mental illness coming into our jail and staying longer than they need to. So I hear you. And unfortunately, you know, we have to make these cuts. And when we make these cuts, I mean, there are lasting effects.
Yeah, maybe throwing good money after bad or something. And I also just want to make the comment that we were talking this morning about, you know, right sizing the criminal justice system, but over time, one hopes that the system is shrinking. So there's no set place that we ought to be, but cutting it without doing it the right way isn't going to get us where we think we want to go. That's
so, and just to make a quick point about that, what you said about the criminal justice system should be shrinking. And unfortunately, community corrections is doing an excellent job. And their population is shrinking. So the total number of people that they supervise has gone down. And with that, they get less money. So, you know, it is a catch-22 in a lot of situations where if you're doing good work, then there's less money available to continue to do the good work.
But hopefully fewer people in the system. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Fisher?
Thank you. So Sheriff Roberts, thank you for your service. Really appreciate all that you've done for our community. My question sort of tags on to what Sean was saying. I'm interested in programs, especially LEAD, the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. These kind of collaborations, and we have numerous collaborations that the Sheriff's Office works with H3S and really works to keep people out of the system and create diversion. And I'm just interested in the long-term health of those programs, and has the funding, I know it's an integration of funding from a variety of sources, including the District Attorney's Office, H3S, and the Sheriff's Office, but I'm just wanting to make sure that these very effective efforts are still continuing, and they're just sort of safe, I guess. Just a comment on that.
Yeah. And I can talk a little bit about that, and you might have Jenna talk a little bit as also, but obviously Rich Swift and I work very closely together, support tremendous amount of the programs he has going. And this was one of the things that was, again, very painful to take a look at having to cut. And so, yeah, we do not have the funds to fund that deputy anymore. We've actually, I asked Jenna to take a look at it actually more than once to see if there's any way we could possibly fund that. But I think with the totality of the cuts that we're having to make, that is one of them that unfortunately we also had to do. So Jenna, do you want to add anything to that?
So unfortunately, over the last 2 years, we have contributed, not specifically a deputy, but $160,000 with H3S to support this program. And we were given a very clear directive from the county administrator to cut programs, not people. And so that's what we've done. And unfortunately, we just do not have the additional money to continue this program. It's a great program. We we support it and we'll continue to support it. But right, the program. Right. Sorry, I'm having multiple people talking to me. So yes, and also this isn't our program. This is an H3S program that we will continue to be part of and continue to be supportive of, but we can't financially be part of it anymore, or at least not this fiscal year.
Can you direct me to where in the materials that shows up?
Commissioner Fisher, it used to show as an interfund transfer to H3S, and that interfund transfer is no longer budgeted within the budget. So it will not show. So I can send you how it appeared in the budget. I'd be happy to email that to you so you can see where it was budgeted and where the loss is now noted.
Okay, are there any other things that are being cut from this budget that we don't have in our materials that are important like this?
Yeah, and the distinguishing difference is how the budget is presented, that it's rolled up more into an MFR format versus a line by line. Otherwise, no, we're meeting the same commitments. The cuts that we made were outlined for you on the final slide of our presentation. But that one interfund transfer, I will send to you so you can see where it would be depicted.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, quickly, just one thing I want to just help clarify. Mr. Feely kind of talked about the 100 cars or brought out about the 100 cars. Just want to express that at least what I've heard and heard from sheriff staff and leadership is that, I don't even think that they've even said that they've been able to maintain 100 patrol officers. But I also didn't have time today, and with this COVID thing and remote meeting, virtual meetings, it wasn't the right time. But at some point, I did want to draw out the number of vehicles that are over 100,000 miles that are actually out in the boneyard, so to speak, or out the pasture that are kind of sitting out like at the lot at Abernathy. I know there's a number of vehicles there they're not used on a daily basis. So I don't want people to walk away thinking that we have the vehicles out there that are on the street right now, that 100 of them that are driving every day are have 100,000 miles or more on them or beyond that life. I don't think that's the case, and I just want to clarify. Maybe that can be clarified by staff. How many patrol cars are somewhat dormant or idle? How many patrol cars are used in any one day? And what the mileage on the average fleet that is actually being used is? That's what I'd really like to know. Because I do know we purchased a lot of vehicles just last year, this last budget cycle, and we got more even scheduled. So I know that year after year, we're folding in new vehicles. I know we racked the miles up, but I don't want people to walk away with the impression that we have a very aged, tired fleet out there and that all the cars out there that are being driven by the 30 or so deputies per shift or so have 100,000 plus miles on them.
Can I make a suggestion? Hello.
So
I have a suggestion that may get us the information we need, and that is to get a full inventory of the sheriff's office vehicles. I mean, if we got vehicles that aren't being used, we should sell them, right? Because the salvage value just goes down every year. So that's part of it too.
And we will definitely follow up with that information, but I'd like to clarify that the vehicles that are sitting or appear to be sitting are there for maintenance. And they're also the backup vehicles. So if there's a deputy who was on patrol and the vehicle just dies, that they have something that they can use. Right. My understanding is that those vehicles are also in very high mileage. So we're not in a position to rotate the way that we need to when they time out. And now that the budget is further reduced, we're going to be able to do that with fewer vehicles. But we will definitely get you the detail.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Oh, I just said it's going to cost you more money now too, because you've got these aged vehicles.
Right. Thank you for the question, and we will get that information to you, Commissioner.
We have Commissioner Humberston and then Commissioner Schrader. Commissioner, your mic.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that the county and the sheriff's department are all in the same boat together when it comes to the issues of law enforcement and the costs. It's one of the most expensive things that we do, and it does take a very big chunk of our general fund budget, as already been pointed out. And the basic function of a sheriff's department is patrol and jail and court support. Unfortunately, because the state doesn't want to build any new prisons, they have pushed an awful lot of the law enforcement and confinement part of the burden down in our direction. And there's only so much that counties can do. They only have so many jail beds, et cetera. And on top of that, because we are underfunding mental health and those kinds of programs at the state level, the sheriff's department has tried to pick up some of those costs. So what we are really sitting here dealing with is a problem that much of which should have been funded by the state instead of being pushed down at the county level. I know for a fact we sit with a state hospital that has cottages all the way around it that are not being used, that could be used as mental health beds for populations in this state, including our county, all because the state pushes this down on the counties. So while yes, we have to cut our budget, and yes, the sheriff has to participate in that process, I just want to make sure people understand that we are really dealing with a tax system and a state government that is pushing things down at the county level, and there's only so much that property tax can pay for. I can't be any more blunt than that.
Commissioner Schrader.
Well, just first let me start by saying, Craig, it's been a pleasure to work with you all these years, and you're retiring and I'm still here. How the heck did that happen? Anyway. But I would like to play off a little bit about what Ken said, because I do agree with what he said, that essentially what's happening, a lot of the things that you're doing, mental health, domestic, a lot of this is being, pushed to counties, and it's straining our public safety system. So here's my worry after doing years and years of these budgets. If we don't make the budget cuts now, are we going to have, and maybe Elizabeth can help me with this, will we have deeper cuts later? And if so, if we maintain one program, what are the other cuts are we as a budget committee going to be willing to make in other areas of the county? Because I think given the given the crisis that we're in with COVID, the decline in dollars, the state has been terrible about community corrections. They've underfunded us for years, and I know that this is a different piece of it. But is this a sustainable budget? It's not that I don't want to fund it, let me be honest, that's not it. But if it's not sustainable, what other choices do we have? Because something's going to have to give somewhere. So where in the county, if we as a budget committee want to start thinking about where that might be, do we cut mental health? Do we stop doing transportation? Do we, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But what the sustainability of everything, and I'm just going to caution us. I don't just think it's Sheriff, your area that's going to be facing this. I think it's going to be pretty dire. I think it's one of the worst budget scenarios I have ever seen in my long history of being a county commissioner. So I don't want to be gloom and doom, but I do think we need to think about the long-term sustainability. If we fund all of this now, which I think we would, all of us would like to do, but what is that going to entail with what else we're going to cut? So I just wanted to get that out there for people to start thinking about. Okay. Oops, do want to start the video.
Chair Parks, I see no other hands.
Nor do I. Thank you very much, Drenda.